Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salaylo Makwidi. We're going to be heading over to the Eastern Cape, where the government there is pushing back after the controversial Israeli-linked visits and hospital donations, which were facilitated by the AbaThembu king, Utalinjebo. And allegedly this happened without the knowledge or approval of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Mr. Oscar Mabuyane, has condemned those engagements, warning they may breach diplomatic protocol and undermine South Africa's official foreign policy. And to help us unpack the Eastern Cape's provincial government's position, we are joined now by Sonwabo Mbananga, the spokesperson of the Eastern Cape Premier. Sonwabo, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you for the opportunity, and good morning to your listeners and viewers alike. Thank you.
And I think we'll jump right into it. At what point did Premier Oscar Mabuyane get to know and hear about these engagements that the Israeli embassy and its officials were having in the Eastern Cape, the visits and some of the donations that were made to these hospitals? And why did the Premier feel it was necessary to intervene publicly in this matter?
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity once again. When the Premier learned about what had transpired, because you'll recall that this visit did not take place in this year of 2026, but was conducted late last year. And of course, as visuals and social media material from the visit was making the rounds, circulating, it eventually reached the Premier. And of course, there were inquiries on two fronts, colleagues of the Premier at national government asking what was this all about, because obviously this was not an outreach, a diplomatic outreach that was known of or sanctioned in Pretoria. And of course, citizens in the province who were equally concerned and confused as to really, are we now seeing the emergence of parallel public programs, and nothing could be further from the truth. The facts are that this engagement by the Embassy of Israel in the Eastern Cape took place outside of the diplomatic norms. You know that we have a lot of missions in South Africa, and specifically the province of the Eastern Cape has a lot of bilateral and multilateral relationships with state or provincial governments of various countries. And all of this work is coordinated not through the Office of the Premier, but the national government as delegated to the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And the Constitution is very clear in this regard, that the function of conducting international relations is not an informal exercise. It is a formal exercise that is located in the Constitution of our Republic within the National Executive, and is delegated, as I've said earlier, to the Department of International Relations and Cooperation.
Let's talk about the role of traditional leaders in the Eastern Cape, and I think maybe this is a conversation that needs to be broadened a little bit to the rest of South Africa. Legally, what kind of power do traditional leaders have, especially when it comes to engaging with foreign governments or embassies? Is there a need to talk to local government? Is there a need to have state approval? What protocol is in place? And are traditional leaders aware of that kind of protocol?
Well, the Constitution, again, is very clear and is not open to subjective interpretation. It is a document that is guiding us all insofar as the framework of not just the Constitution itself, but the legalistic framework of the country to enforce the rule of law. First and foremost, the Constitution outlines also the role of traditional leaders succinctly, that traditional leaders, the Constitution envisages that they play this ambassadorial role, if you like, but within the context of cultural exchanges, of showcasing South Africa's various cultures, um, but also specifically to this visit. For an ordinary visit by His Majesty to the State of Israel, of course, His Majesty, that visit would have been facilitated because the institution of traditional leadership is a sphere and another layer of government in itself. So, ordinarily, under normal circumstances, when traditional leaders, just like our elected officials and representatives of our government, if they are to travel abroad, they will involve foreign affairs or international relations in our context. And of course, then the DERCO department will then facilitate interactions with the country that is intended to be visited through our diplomatic representatives in both countries. There are logistics that take place behind the scene in terms of the travel itinerary of the dignitary that will be traveling, where they will be staying, and what will the itinerary be. The provincial government of the Eastern Cape is not involved in that. I need also to put that up front. Our concern is that subsequent to the visit, is that you see then diplomatic officials from the Embassy of Israel landing in the Eastern Cape without the knowledge of the provincial government, without the consent or permission of the provincial government, which is an accepted convention in terms of the diplomatic protocols, that a mission, the most recent one that we interacted with, for an example, was the US mission to come and have a discussion on what were the progress on our developmental plans and so forth, and to mutually look into areas of possible cooperation. And of course, as a developing province, we are in a situation where we are very much welcoming and opening to international support in aid of our developmental agenda. But these can't happen with outside of the framework of the Constitution, outside of the rule of law. You can't then, therefore, have a foreign government, representatives of that government, landing in the province, not just visiting the king, which is, there's no anomaly in that if they wanted to do that. But once you involve public programs, once you then say you want to come and support public programs, and you are also saying that you come bearing gifts that you want to give to departments that are interacting with the public of the Eastern Cape. This is our public healthcare system, by the way. Without the involvement, the buy-in, the knowledge of the provincial government, which is accountable for the safety, the well-being, the welfare, the prosperity of the people and citizens in the Eastern Cape, not a traditional leader, not a foreign government or foreign embassy officials, but the provincial government would have to account. So what we are saying that to counter this argument that is also coming out of the media in Israel, as well as out of the website of the Israeli embassy here in South Africa, it is incorrect to frame this impasse as though South Africa is anti-Israel or anti-development or anti-accepting assistance. Far from the truth. The truth is that the Embassy of Israel officials bypassed accepted convention and protocols and went directly to meet a monarch, a traditional leader in the province, without the knowledge, consent, or informing the provincial government. Now, let me go into what are the implications of this. Say, for instance, you are a foreign country, whatever country you may be, you come into the Eastern Cape, you say you want to assist us develop, you've identified the public healthcare sector and seemingly agriculture with the bringing of water to water scarce parts of the Eastern Cape. Should anything go wrong, should the lives of ordinary people in the province be impacted adversely, negatively, the premier will have to account. That's what the constitution says. That's what the law says. It doesn't say that a traditional leader who then brought such implements or such assistance will then have to account. It doesn't work like that. And therefore, the premier's position is that if the Embassy of Israel is really interested in assisting the Eastern Cape in tackling the systematic developmental and deep-seated developmental issues in the Eastern Cape, issues which, by the way, are not new, did not spring up last December, have been with us for decades. And we have been saying upfront that this is our stated objective of, in particular, lifting the eastern parts of the Eastern Cape, because you will remember that this was largely part of the self-governing territories under the apartheid regime, which were neglected deliberately, underdeveloped. And we've been, since the advent of democracy, seized with the development, not just in terms of the human capital, in terms of improving the performance and the outcomes of education in the province, but also to follow through with infrastructure development so that we encourage investments to come into the province, because that is how you evince the value proposition of the Eastern Cape as an investment destination. You improve your infrastructure, you ready your skills base, you ready your industrial and manufacturing base, basic services, water, electricity, which you are hoping then will attract that investment. And we accept and we welcome all of the international like-minded countries who share our vision of developing the Eastern Cape into away from just being a raw materials sending a province to a province that now processes its own raw materials with the requisite skills to put together the finished product for the global markets. But it's a long-term project. But to come back to the issue that we are on, we are not anti-Israel. That is not our space to have a view or an opinion on. We are not anti-development. In fact, we welcome and encourage development. But the laws of South Africa as a sovereign country must be respected. The constitutional framework must be respected. And the premier will not abdicate his responsibility insofar as discharging his constitutional responsibilities to South Africans and to the people of the Eastern Cape, insofar as having a firm hand insofar as what is happening in the Eastern Cape, particularly as they impact and affect public programs.
I want to come to the response of some of the hospitals out in the Eastern Cape. They are CEOs because they were asked about this breach of protocol and it being clarified, and the two Eastern Cape hospitals that were visited, their CEOs explained that they did not want to be seen as defying Uking Talinkebo, and therefore allowed the Israeli embassy officials access to the hospitals. How does the provincial government assess this kind of defense in terms of government standards and the protocol that is in place?
Look, first and foremost, I need to also say that as part of us as an office, as an institution, collating all the relevant facts around the unauthorized diplomatic mission of the Israeli embassy into the Eastern Cape late last year, we also learned that the Department of Health had, in fact, found some preliminary indicators of what has happened. And what we early on learned was that the two CEOs, which are cited in the various media reports, were invited to what they thought were service delivery related meetings at the Royal Court. And of course, you can't refuse a summons, an invite to the Royal Court. But upon landing there, what we understand is that they then realized that there were Israeli embassy officials present, and that indeed they further learned what the intention of their visit was. And of course, we also learned that they felt that they were placed in a hard situation where they could not embarrass the king, if you like, in front of visiting guests. As government, we reject that explanation outright. We need to say it up front. We reject it because government operates not on personalities or on how you feel today. We've got regulations, we've got regulatory frameworks that take care of every administrative aspect insofar as being accountable in government, and including the acceptance of would-be donations or implements to drive whatever program you are driving further. There's a manner in which that is conducted. Also, there's a manner in which visiting dignitaries will apply with the department to access public facilities or public healthcare in this instance. And the inquiry then that the Premier has requested of the MEC for Health is an explanation, really, how these two breaches occurred. Firstly, the access to public institutions of the Department of Health, and secondly, how did the department receive and accept gifts from an unauthorized or unsanctioned diplomatic mission to the Eastern Cape. You will also recall that His Majesty also took the delegation to visit Walter Sisulu University. The Premier's position is clear, is that this is a behavior unbecoming of the position of His Majesty. And it is really regrettable that such flouting of diplomatic regulations, protocols would take place. But it has happened. Ours now is to assert the role and the constitutionally enshrined powers of the provincial government, because again we talk to, in our initiating statement, we talk to sovereignty, how this undermines our sovereignty. Of course, it does undermine sovereignty. If you are going to bypass the Department of International Relations and Cooperation as a foreign country and go and conduct as you wish, willy-nilly, your foreign missions that you have determined on your own what the needs of these people are of this country, without engaging the elected governments of those countries, is totally unacceptable and is a gross violation of diplomatic protocols.
I have a question here from a listener. We had this discussion with other guests on one of our shows last night, and one of the guests that we had was Dr. Ngobeni Nzongani from the Land Party, and he essentially blames the government of the day. He blames the African National Congress for this. He says this was bound to happen, and possibly the Eastern Cape won't be the first and last province where Israel is intervening or will be intervening, and that King Dalindyebo is not the first nor the last king to be on the side of Israel, as the government of the day, the ANC, continues to ignore, it continues to undermine and humiliate royal houses, and also the issue of service delivery has been forthcoming. It feels like there's a vacuum, there's a gaping hole in service delivery, which leaves residents desperate for these kinds of interventions, and they may be used as a exploitation kind of feature because of the shortcomings of the government itself, and also the continued seemingly being ignored of the royal houses and some of the chiefs and kings that we have across the country. How do you respond to that?
Firstly, it is false and an untruth that royal houses or traditional leadership in the province is being actively undermined by the government. That one is rejected outright. Firstly, traditional leadership in the Eastern Cape has an added layer in terms of their independent voice. We do have what you call the Eastern Cape Provincial House of Traditional and Khoisan Leaders, a traditional leadership parliament, if you like, where the Premier and the provincial government can be summoned on issues that are pertinent to traditional leadership, on issues that traditional leadership require clarity on. You will recall that a few weeks ago, there was a protest march by traditional leaders to the seat of the Premier at Lillian Diedrich's house in Bishop.
Mm-hmm.
We did not ridicule traditional leadership. It is false to assert that view against the provincial government. We extended the sincerest of courtesies to our traditional leaders because we also recognize their critical role in our society as they are the custodians of our cultural identities. They have a critical role to play in fostering cohesion and unity in South Africa, not just here in the Eastern Cape. So those grievances, for an example, were touching on issues such as medical aid, your pension, dispensation for traditional leaders. Government did not respond with indifference or with rejection. Government actively presented its challenges, the work it has done so far to support traditional leaders in the province, including the royal courts that you find in the province. It's tabulated. The Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs in the Eastern Cape has that document. They can easily supply it in terms of the update as to what it is that government has done to provide support, physical, material support to traditional leaders, to royal courts, from headmen up to monarchs. So that one is untrue. Are there contentious issues between particular royal houses with government? Probably. But the facts are, government's door remains open. Government does not enjoy the luxury of having particular feelings about a particular official or about a particular traditional leader. We have a constitutional a duty to discharge our responsibilities in the province. So it is untrue also that traditional leaders or royal courts are not able to engage government or the executive authority in the province, which is the Premier of the Eastern Cape. That is also not true. What has happened here is that there was simply no contact, no official debriefing, even after His Majesty had returned from his visit from Israel, to give an update to the Premier, to update necessarily if at the time the visit hadn't taken place, to prepare for the visit through the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and to also sensitize the Premier so that we ready the departments that the State of Israel would have identified that they would want to enter into collaborative agreements with or assistant programs with. None of the above has happened. We just saw pictures circulating in the social media indicating that there's been a traditional leader conducting a foreign visit of foreign representatives in the province, and that can't be allowed. Service delivery challenges. We've never shied away from this as well. There are serious, deep, systematic, structural, and historical challenges to the Eastern Cape. Have we been dishonest about this? No. I don't believe that there's a single corner of our social, of the social spectrum in the Eastern Cape where we have been dishonest or unwilling to communicate proactively and honestly, transparently with our province. Are we having problems, perhaps with lethargy in some of our in how we roll out our programs? Perhaps, because nothing is perfect in government. Are we making progress? We've made tremendous progress from the perspective of infrastructure development in the province. It's there for you to see. You can interrogate this across the various length and breadth of this vast province, which is very, very big in terms of the land area that you have. Government has turned around the situation, for an example, of our schools. We are now left out of many thousands previously. We are now left with just a little over 300 schools that are still using pit latrines, and we are working with speed, at speed, to change this for our learners, to create an environment not just for increased access, because you will recall that sanitary provision in schools is very critical, particularly for the girl child, to be able to be at school at all times and not take a break because of inadequate sanitary provision. For everybody, for the teaching staff, we are moving with speed. We are improving our health sector. Since COVID, for an example, people must be honest. We've rolled out billions in the lifting of infrastructure in the health sector in the Eastern Cape. We are working with speed. We have a huge challenge of roads which are inadequate. Indeed, we recognized perhaps sometime in the sixth administration that we need added capacity. We did not waste time. We went straight to Sanral. Sanral, we are going to give you our roads budget. We want you, because you have capacity, to assist us in this regard, because it is critical that we particularly bring to speed and up to global standards our critical arteries that come into the province, because we need to give a pressure release valve to our over-congested, overburdened economic hubs, your Gauteng, your KZN, with inlets into the province, because we've got wonderful ports. We've got great ports which are ready to assist in the export of goods which are being exported from South Africa. But we need to fine-tune. Also in rail, we are working with speed with Transnet to quickly revamp the inlet into the province to bring in goods for export. And also our ports, we're working with the Ports Authority at speed to galvanize their resources to prepare for, because we are in an unprecedented economic upswing in terms of the momentum of investments which are landing in the Eastern Cape from the sixth administration to the seventh. Has there been lethargy? Has there been corruption? Has there been malfeasance, wasteful expenditure in government? Indeed. And we are taking a firm stance to first and foremost, hold officials accountable. You will be held accountable. If you are an official who is not doing his job, who is misusing public funds, you will be dealt with. That one must be clear. No one in government can ever sanction corruption or malfeasance in the public, particularly in the public service. So let us separate issues. Let us separate issues. Do we have work to do as government to restore confidence, if you like, of the populace? Indeed, we do. Indeed, we do. But is there no effort from the part of government? Absolutely. There's 1,000% effort that is pushing ahead right now to lift the Eastern Cape.
Before I let you go, can we clarify what will happen to those donations that have been made to Mthatha General Hospital and also the Nelson Mandela Academic Hospital, if I'm not mistaken? Will they be retained by the hospitals? Will they be placed into government official channels or returned pending the outcome of the investigation? And what safeguards are being put into place to ensure that accountability and transparency around those resources is accounted for? And also there are still engagements that are happening currently with the Israeli embassy, and not only but also I think I saw on their social media around 50 other traditional leaders. They visited the Nchangases as well. They seem to have outlined long term plans, including provision of water, building of roads and bridges. There seems to be a systematic plan that's in place for the Eastern Cape's rural areas, where the Israeli government essentially will be looking after the people there. What's the mitigating factor? What channels are there that you guys have put into place to see that this is not done without the approval of DECO and all of the other relevant stakeholders within government?
Okay, you've condensed so many issues into your question. I'll
I'm
try to
sorry,
recall.
I'm running out of time. I'm so sorry.
I'll try to recall each of them. But what I need to quickly assert from the onset is that we do not recognize any discussions between any traditional leader with a foreign mission in the country that has not gone through the proper channels and protocols, starting with DERCO and cascading to the province through the office of the premier. We regard any agreements, promises made to each other as null and void. Secondly, the issue of the gifts that were delivered to hospitals. You'll recall that earlier in our interview, I said that the Premier has directed the MEC of Health to provide the Premier with a report following their own investigation as to how 2 breaches occurred. 1, access to public hospitals, and 2, the gifts that were received. How were they received? How were they processed? How did they come about? How did the visits themselves come about? And how were our officials involved in meetings at the Royal Court? That's the second part. Therefore, the report will also have to look at what are these implements or donations, if you like, that have been received by the departments concerned. And by the way, we are not anti-development assistance. If those equipment or implements, they suit our purposes, because we are government, we know the programs. If they suit our purposes, we will very well use them. But what we will not do is to legitimize an illegal, unauthorized diplomatic overtures by the State of Israel in the Eastern Cape. And to this end, we will not permit any engagement with state institutions or with the Embassy of Israel or any other country, because this is not an anti-Israeli issue, or any other country without the proper protocols being observed.
But how can it not be an anti-Israel issue when we know the sentiment that the national government has against Israel? We've essentially taken this country to the ICJ for plausible genocide. So saying that the doors are still open, I think it might send mixed messaging around what national government is saying and what you guys at provincial government seem to be saying or sharing rather.
We need to be honest, people, as we discuss and debate issues. Firstly, there is no diplomatic winter between the State of Israel and South Africa. Diplomatic relations are in place, they are ongoing. Firstly, another impression that regarding this anti-Israeli sentiment, Israel is deeply entrenched in the South African economy. You know this. And particularly here in the Eastern Cape, they are not new. They are already involved in various sectors. Starting in agriculture, they are busy with farmers in terms of your irrigation systems, for an example. They've got technologies in that space which they've been sharing with our farmers for decades. You know that Israeli companies are involved in food production in South Africa, including here in the Eastern Cape. We do have clover farms in the Eastern Cape. You have high-end retail giants in South Africa which merchandise and sell goods which are manufactured from Israeli-owned firms. So let's do away with that notion. It doesn't exist. Secondly, charity begins at home, by the way. I don't want to go into what you allude to may be the position of national government. We are the provincial government of the Eastern Cape. But I do want to say charity begins at home. You would think that priority is in the devastation that has been caused in Gaza. You would think that, but I don't want to go into that. You would think that priority ought to be going do for the reconstruction and development of the desperately needed help in Gaza. But I don't want to wade further into that space. So this notion that Israel or the embassy of Israel is this messiah coming to rescue the Eastern Cape is misplaced. Because if they were genuinely interested in assisting our developmental programs, which are known by the public, they would have gone to the right channels, would have interfaced with government, both nationally and here in the province. In fact, we would have assisted them to identify the quick wins in terms of the much needed developmental assistance required in the province. But they must not misrepresent or frame this out of context to serve their interests, particularly as I'm reading releases out of their embassy website and suggest that we are anti them, when in fact they have not observed the respect for the constitution and the rule of law in South Africa, which will not be allowed to happen.
There you go, Sonwabo Mbananga, spokesperson to the Premier of the Eastern Cape. Thank you so much for giving us the time. I think you've cleared up a lot, especially when it comes to what we think we know about our diplomatic relations with the state of Israel. That was really, really refreshing. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There you go, spokesperson to the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Mr. Sonwabo Mbananga there. Yeah. I think, there's so much conversations around our government and the sentiment that is out there to the world about Israel and the atrocities that they have caused in Gaza in the last few years, the ICJ case, and how we've postured essentially to the international community versus the true lived realities on the ground. And I think Sonwabo, they made it quite clear that there's a lot of posturing. There's a lot of lies that are being peddled. Israel still enjoys fruitful diplomatic ties with South Africa. Their businesses are still operating in South Africa. Their embassy is still open and working in South Africa. And we're essentially being lied to. So I think that's my key takeaway from this interview, that what government and in government circles is said and what is reiterated to us, the masses, two different things. They are not walking the talk. We've been lied to. And I want to wrap up with a social media post here. It comes from Andile Mqletama. You know him. He's with the MK, formerly with the Black First, Land First Party. And he essentially says, can you blame the king? This is alluding to King Dalindyebo. He says, King Dalindyebo is confronted by the old moral question. If your children are dying of hunger and a mass murder offered you some food, would you maintain a principle and refuse the help and let your children suffer? It's true. Israel is killing women and children in Palestine, but uses soft diplomacy to gain legitimacy across the world. This question is best addressed by the king and his conscience. I am not in position to condemn a parent who teams up with the devil to save his own kids. He continues to say, our moral outrage must go to the ANC, which has abandoned the Eastern Cape and turned it into the cutting-edge province. Also, some responsibility must go to the voters who keep on voting for a party which clearly hates them. It's a bit complex matter, this. We must pray for ethical leadership to end the desperation of our people. A lot to ponder on. And with that, we've come to the end of today's edition of News and Views. Thank you so much for staying with us for the past 2 hours. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. This is going to dominate the headlines for some time, and we'll be right there to give you all of the latest and all that you need to know. This is News and Views with me, Salailo Makwidiri. I'll be back with you again next week. Bye for now. Shap, shap.